So here's an example of the wings. They have flat spars, which is that piece. You can see there's indications of where all the ribs go. And there are the ribs, and they have little slots cut out in the middle of them. And those are all backed onto balsa. So I put those parts together on the mid-wing. And that's all the parts except for a couple on the end, and I'll show you. But you can see where you just got to go slow. They slide right over. Everything's been thinned the way it's supposed to be. And boy, I wouldn't want to do this with cardboard. The balsa is much nicer. But there's a rib with a cut in it, and you can see it slides right onto the end, and with a nice, strong, straight wing when you do this. I like it when there's lots of ribs because it gives you more structure and it makes it more realistic. Put a little glue on, slide it into place, make sure it's square and true, and take off a little extra glue, and Bob's your uncle. Then you put on the end piece, and I just sort of put it on the end of the table and make sure it's flat. It kind of helps make it so that it's actually where it's supposed to be a little bit. And there it is, ready to be covered. And here is the covering. Now I did go back and I forgot to tell you about this. That's a little piece that goes in the midsection right on the trailing edge. So put some glue on here, and that goes in because that's a place where it sort of has a curved trailing edge, but it doesn't go back to the knife edge that's on the rest of the wing. So you just make sure you put it in the right side up. There's a sidedness to it, but it's obvious when you look at the plans. And it's obvious by the fit. Took me a couple seconds here to fiddle it in there, but it works fine. Fits great. Again, there hasn't been a part on this model that hasn't fit pretty dang close to perfect. And there it is. Now, what I was trying to say was, here are the skins. Now, D in the Polish stands for something, but that's the bottom wing. That's the underside. I think D is down. That's how I think of it. And then G is for the top section, because you have to make sure you know which way is which. Maybe they're slightly different in terms of how they're cut. But that's the way this is going to go. You're going to put glue on there, and you're going to put that right in just like that, making sure everything matches up. And I'm just sort of practice fitting it here. And then you put some glue on it on the bottom side. Make sure you're putting it onto the bottom piece. And I line it up here. It's hard to manipulate this in front of the camera, but I make sure I line up that center section so that it fits on that right angle edge there, right there. That's how that was my key point for aligning everything. And then you've got glue on there, and you just real carefully start kind of pushing down gently. But man, with balsa in here, it's fantastic because it gives it some rigidity and structure. The other cool thing is I found that my balsa skeleton was a little bit bendy, but when you put the paper in it and you glue it all together, it's ramrod straight, so it's wonderful. So you keep playing around with this, and I'm using my fingers to give it some undercamber because the ribs are cut with a little undercamber. And you just keep padding along and making sure the glue sticks. And there it is. It looks really good. See, and there's the undercamber. So I'm trying to show with my finger that there's a concave portion of that. And that's very realistic, actually. It looks cool. Now, it's together. Everything's good. Now we got to start to roll the top over. And to begin, I put it on a mouse pad or something similar, and I take my Prismacolor pencil and I roll it to give it a little bit of curve, just a little bit so it'll go over the top easier. And now, to do this, you do it in increments. And this little section is kind of long, but I line up a long ruler up against where the leading edge is, and I hold down the wing, push on those pieces of wood on the spar, and I start to very carefully pull up like that. And what you're doing is kind of suggesting to the paper, hey, I want you to curve over. But you don't just whip it up and over because you're going to crinkle it and bend it funny. You're going to get bad wrinkles in the leading edge. So you just kind of do it very incrementally. Treat it delicately and just not all one fell swoop. And you just keep doing this. And it takes a good 5 minutes to just slowly bring it over and let it relax, and then bring it back up and let it relax, back and forth, until you finally get to a point where you can wrap it all the way around. And your goal is to have it touch the trailing edge and show no white on the trailing edge, because then it'll be completely covered. But what you'll see here pretty easily is I got a nice gap on that trailing edge where my fingers are. So I got to get rid of that. What I ended up doing was taking a sanding block and sanding right along the leading edge just a little bit, and kind of, smoothing it out a little bit. Take a little bit of material off and trying to make it curve. It's not as hard as it looks to do. It's very easy. And you can see as I'm just rolling it over, and I'm trying to get a little bit off there, and then I ended up also sanding along the top of the ribs, because they're not perfectly cut. I mean, you're doing the best you can, and they're pretty dang close. But, it's not going to be absolutely perfect. So I took a little bit off on the top, and I kept sanding on the leading edge. Just don't want to square it off or anything, but you're trying to just take a little bit more off. If I can take little incremental bits off every so often, and then you keep test fitting it and test fitting it and test fitting it. Whole process took me about half hour of just piddling around with it. And I'm just trying to show that I took off a little bit of material. I mean, you can't even tell, but it's enough, with more little sanding block work and sanding along the actual surface of the ribs with some more sandpaper all the way along, and even on the trailing edge. And then look, that gives me enough so that, look at that, it comes right to the trailing edge beautifully all the way across. So add a little glue. Make sure you glue the ribs. Again, I like it when there's a rib at each station. Glue your trailing edge. I actually probably put on too much glue on this, but it worked out okay. And then you commit to folding it over and making it glue. And you got to be careful, but you test fit it so many times, and you forced the paper over so many times, that it's actually, it knows its own way. It's already kind of pre-formed. And you make sure that ends up butting up to the midsection where it's supposed to. And don't worry if you get a couple little fingerprints. You can get rid of those later. A little bit of glue on your fingers. I mean, try not to, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. In our case, we're going to paint again, so it won't matter. But even if you weren't going to paint, you can get that off. And see, I'm using my fat fingers to pad along and just kind of make sure I'm getting contact with the glue and the rib, because you do want it to be nice and smooth, and you want it to be in contact so it's nice and strong, because this is giving you strength and rigidity on the whole wing. I mean, again, it's nice and straight. Now that trailing edge at the midsection there, see, it's open. And so what I did is put a little bit of glue in the gap right along where those top and bottom pieces are going to come together, and then take my fingers, my thumbs, and pinch them together. Pinch, 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 all the way in the trailing edge. And you see I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on there. I'm just squeezing them like that. And I'm pulling the paper and pushing it together. And just like everything else you've seen before with my stuff, sometimes you need a little extra glue once in a while. And I'm using some tweezers to get some really fine pinching in there. But when you're done, look at that. Compare it, a few minutes back, how there was openings. Now they're all closed up and look great. So just a little bit of patience and working the paper looks good. Now we get to get the wingtips. These are notoriously difficult to do. But what I'm doing here is using my finger as a base, and I'm using the piece of bamboo skewer to roll the leading edge of the paper on the top and the bottom. And just like anything else, what you're doing is curving that. And if you look carefully, you can see the front edge and the bottom curled. So now when I kind of sandwich them together, they automatically form a nice little edge. So add a little glue, squeeze them together, and it's a process kind of like that midsection again, making sure those pieces come together. And in the triplane, it's supposed to be basically two angles that come together kind of in the middle if you look at it on the leading edge. Some models even have it wrong. Some plastic models have them flat or something. But anyway, this came together great. I was kind of surprised. There's the edge. Looks really good. Looks just fine. Now I make sure, I already cut these open, but I just made sure these are going to be for the eye struts that go through, which by the way, on a real triplane, they were apparently not necessary. It was a fully cantilevered airplane, but people wanted them in there to make themselves feel good. Of course, having never flown a Fokker triplane, I don't know if that's true. But from what I understand, these weren't even necessary. But anyway, I'm cutting those out just to make sure I got a place to put things. But you can see the whole little midwing. It's flat, it's straight, it's true, it's square. And there's the edge. I'm very pleased with those. A little bit of sanding and we prime it. It looked great. See, and there's that edge on. Look, and I haven't had plastic models that look that good. So, good golly, it's amazing that that's paper and balsa. Now I'm just sighting down, making sure that it's not twisted or warped, and it's not. You have to take my word for it, but it's pretty impressive. And then I just bring the body over to show you where it's going to go, so you have a feel for how it's going to come together. It'll fit right up there. It looks kind of goofy because it's not painted like the rest, but it will be soon. What I'll end up doing, I think, is getting all the wings done and then painting everybody at once. But shoot, it's looking pretty sweet.